It's Rylie.
It's Sloan.
It's Briar.
Hang on to your broomsticks.
It's about to get eerie.
Today's episode could contain themes and elements uncomfortable to some listeners. Please check the episode description and remember to always take care of yourself.
So, one of my favorite cases, true crime, unsolved case, is the Black Dahlia murder. It's one a lot of people have heard of. It was really big because, it's 70 years old and we still don't know who did it. And it was pretty gruesome for the time.
But also one thing is that it's not really that talked about. If you notice it, I don't notice a lot of people talking about it, even though it is an unsolved one.
Right. It's popular and people know it, but once you start digging in there, it's there's all these different theories and conspiracy theories and all these people who were interviewed and all these different suspects. And there's been over 500 people who have confessed to it.
Confessed to doing it?
Confessed to doing it.
So there's really a lot unknown.
Yeah, they just come out and they were saying they did. There's a few that we'll talk about specifically. But they ended up with 60 suspects that they were okay, well, these could be viable. And then it was broken down to 20 people that they were yeah, these are probably really who it could be. And then there's a few big theories. There's probably about 3 of those that people are okay, it's one of these 3. One even now, there's the LAPD came out recently. I think it was 2006, and we'll talk about that too. But they were we have enough evidence that if this man was still alive, we could indict him today on it.
Oh.
So, but that's still, you can't say he did it, but they have enough stuff about him.
That he was a good
that they
suspect.
would, yeah.
Or they think he did it.
Yeah, because, he was shady, and we'll get to him. But we'll start with a little bit about who the Black Dahlia was. Her name was Elizabeth Short. She was 22. And her birthday was July 29th, 1924. So she was a Leo. Not that that's important, but it makes sense. And she was actually last seen leaving her hotel in Los Angeles. And it was on January 9th of 1947 when she was last seen. And then they found her body on January 15th of 1947, also in L.A., and that's, of course, she's known for having the gruesome cuts on her face from ear to ear, she was smiling, and she was sawed in half.
Wasn't she raped? What didn't they say that they thought that some sort of sexual abuse happened?
The common stuff they talk about is how the obvious ones. And at her crime scene, they talk about how it was a mother and child found her, which I'm sure that's traumatizing because they're just walking around there, and she thought it was a mannequin, and then realized, oh, it's not. It was a person cut in half. But it was so gruesome because she was sawed completely in half, but there was no blood at the crime scene. So that's why the police knew that she had been
placed there.
Yeah, she was placed there, and it was all done somewhere else. Because her body was scrubbed clean, which was actually some of the evidence. They found 2 little bristles, natural fibers on her, which came back as just normal brushes. So they scrubbed her clean. But the big 2 one are the cut mouth and being cut in half. But she also had one of her breast was cut off. That one, and people don't talk about that one a lot. And she had a tattoo on her thigh that they cut off and actually placed inside her lady area.
They cut her tattoo off?
They cut her tattoo off and rolled it up and placed it inside her.
Oh my God.
Which was one, I had never even heard of that until kind of doing some digging with it. And I was I didn't know about that. And the police actually withheld that from the media because they wanted to use that as a way to tell
who was not a killer.
Yeah, as a secret of who was authentic with it. And the only reason that it actually even leaked was because someone that they interviewed was talking about it to the press and talked about how she had a tattoo. So then they started noticing, well, you can see in her crime, you can see her crime scene pictures if you look it up. And you can see where there's a square of flesh cut from her thigh.
But also one of her breasts was cut.
Yeah, they removed. Yeah, they removed one.
Was it also left at the crime scene, or was it just like gone?
That is gone. It was just gone. Supposedly, there is a guy who we'll talk about, and he's big in it, Steve Hodel. He's done a lot of research. He's the one who says it's his dad. He says it's buried somewhere on the property there, so I'm not sure why exactly he assumes that, but I still thought it was strange. There's also some other cases that it kind of connects with that might play into.
I had no idea about that. All I knew was the cut in half and the Joker slice. I
think it's called a Glasgow?
Or like the Cheshire.
Yeah.
Or Chelsea.
It's something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, but she's cut ear to ear, smiling. Yeah. And then something else that wasn't really big and I didn't know, but her stomach and her intestines were full of feces. So she had been force-fed poop.
Oh my god.
During her torture. Yeah. So they know she wasn't sawed in half while she was alive, but her face was cut while she was alive. And then, so they, during their torture or whatever humiliating torture they were doing, had her eating feces. Which was actually at the crime scene, you can see there's bags off in some of the images to the side. There's a cement bag and manure bags. So they think that she was probably force-fed the manure, and whoever brought her there and dropped her off used those bags to carry her in, because they said it was a greenish brown mixture. It had green particles in it, like fertilizer. Yeah. So it was like manure fertilizer. So those little green nutrient beads for plants. So, and they know her official cause of death was hemorrhagic shock. But they said she also had multiple blows to the head, and there was signs of being strangled. So, but that was not what killed her. So she essentially bled to death because all the stuff that they were doing. Let's see. And I think there's other reports that say she had cigarette burns on her, so they had burned her. And some people really stick true to that, and they're like, yes, they were on there. Some people are like, no. So you can actually go onto the FBI's website and read the files that the FBI has on it, but the FBI wasn't super involved with a lot of it, so they kind of don't have all those details. But they had suspects that they looked at, and I still couldn't figure out why. I couldn't find where it went, so we probably won't focus on those. Lots of dead ends when you're looking into this one. And I did think it was interesting because the LAPD was actually able to identify her in 56 minutes. So once they found her body, it took them 56 minutes
to find out who she was. Because they fingerprints at the time through a fax machine. And she had applied for a job recently with an army depot or some sort of military depot. So she was in there. And then shortly before that, she had got arrested for drinking. So they knew.
So they had her. She had 2 hits on her fingerprints, which one of the pictures that they use most often is actually her mugshot. So they had a picture and everything of her before she was mutilated. But it's pretty gruesome. So, and at the time, I mean, in the 40s, I think I have my own beliefs on it, because I think it was in the 40s, and she was kind of known. They started saying she was just really promiscuous, and she was with lots of guys. I had read somewhere she was with a 60 different men within the last 3 months before she went missing.
Yeah, but wasn't one of the, I guess not theories, but she was wanting to be an actress, so that's why she was in LA, but also, like, trying to sleep her way in to it. Was that an actual proven thing, or was it, like, that's just what they seen her as, that she was trying to sleep her way and get big in film and stuff?
That's why I think she wasn't in LA to be an actress. Everybody, at that time, you're going to Hollywood to make it big. But as far as her sleeping her way to the top, I think she was a young woman who liked to sow her wild oats. And I think a lot of that was stretched by the media and the police. I am a firm believer that her case was slacked off on a little bit because they were like, oh, she's a wild woman. She probably had it coming. Yeah. We still get that today, and I think they were like, we have all these men. She's got this address book full of all these men. It could have been any one of these men that killed her. She probably shouldn't have been so wild and free. You hate that it's like that, but it still ranged, especially in the 1947. You're supposed to be married,
have kids, be a housewife type.
Right. It was still a very, very much that way. And the acting thing, actually, there's a few suspects they're known like as the like famous suspects, which I don't think they're as serious. One of them, though, is Orson Welles, which he's like a Hollywood director and stuff. There's a lady, and I can't say her last name. It's Mary Pacios, Pacios, and she knew the Short family, and they lived in Massachusetts. She was a neighbor, and she said that Orson Welles is the one who did it because Elizabeth Short had sent her sister a letter saying how she was with a Hollywood director and he was going to give her a screen test, and she thought it might be her big break. And she was known, people around at these restaurants had seen her out with him multiple times. And so right before she was found, he was doing a movie, and it's called The Lady from Shanghai. And he made these mannequins in the movie that have the same facial cuts. So they've got the mouth cut and the smile. And that scene was actually cut out from the movie. I've never seen the movie, but they said they actually cut that scene out of it.
Because it made him look very suspicious.
Yeah, that is,
it's pretty
guilty.
Suspicious.
Pretty sus.
Because she said it was almost like, acting out your fantasies. Because he also is known for doing magic and sawing people in half. It's like one of his
magic tricks in the book.
Right, and it's one of the magic tricks he's done. He used to do a show with his wife.
That's weird.
Right?
That's very...
It makes you go, what?
If he didn't do it, that is very incriminating to think about.
It gets a little weirder on him.
Oh, no.
Because, it was about 3 months prior that the mannequins came out, is what I was kind of gathering time-wise. He also left the country in January.
Oh.
She was found in January 15th. And he left the country for 10 months. He was in the middle of directing in and starring in a movie. And he refused to come back and do it.
He just left.
Just left the country for 10 months.
With all that, it automatically seems like you're guilty,
very weird.
sir. That is...
Yeah. I was like, what? I was like, okay, so you just made mannequins with the sliced smile.
One of your magic tricks that you've done is
you like to cut them in half.
And you leave the country for 10 months.
Right. And they were begging him to come back. Because they're like, you're in the middle of directing it and starring this movie.
But you're refusing to come back for some reason.
And he's like, nope.
Nah, I'm good.
No, thank you. No, thank you. The other celebrity ones, he's the only one of the celebrity ones that was like, that's very weird.
Yeah.
But he was never really taken serious as a suspect. But I'm like, he knows her
how is
and
that
all
not
of
taken?
this.
as a serious suspect.
I mean, I guess because he was well known, so they were like, it couldn't be him.
Well, also, you forget it's 19...
It was a man's world, 1947.
Yeah.
But he was definitely one of the ones I was like, that's very bizarre. And like I said, she really felt like she wrote a book and was like, he did it. So, the other celebrity, which was just kind of funny, is Woody Guthrie, who is like a folk singer and like does songs, and he did the "This Land Is Your Land" song. And I'm like, huh. But he was a suspect because he had like some really explicit stalking letters about someone he was stalking. He was also one that wasn't really looked at, but it was kind of like he was obsessively stalking someone at that time in that area.
So they kind of thought it was her.
Right, so you're kind of like, ooh, that could be weird. Not like
the first
he likes to saw people in half. And he, boop, out the country for 10 months.
Check 1, check 2, check 3.
Yeah, like, Anyway. And then the other one is Bugsy Siegel, who was an LA mobster. And I think he just really got lumped in because he was a mobster. And they were like,
why not?
yeah. And all the theories around him were just like more blaming other people. They were like, oh, he did it because he would have sent this hitman to kill her. And they were like, oh no, it was another mobster that was framing him. But none of those really stuck out because he was actually somewhere else. I think he was in Vegas at the time, and he was like,
both
already had his weird relationship with someone going on.
Yeah, both those make sense why they weren't like
looked at.
Yeah. I'm still surprised that they didn't think the freaking first guy was. Maybe we should look into this just a little bit. Maybe just a little bit.
Like, you're intrigued by cutting faces, sawing people in half. You decide to take a 10-month-long vacation right at that time. Interesting.
It's fine. We'll look past it. He didn't do it.
No, he would never. Especially even knowing the victim. I don't think today that definitely would have been looked at.
Yeah.
Because you've been seen with her multiple times. Like.
Oh, I feel in today it would have prime suspect number
right, you're going to
one.
be questioned.
Yeah.
You're going to be questioned. But, so those are the celebrity ones that, like I said, people kind of, they're interesting, but they weren't like the prime ones that people still think today, except for that lady who believes he did it. So we'll just kind of go through some of those. They were, like I said, there were some that the FBI had information on, but I could never really figure out why. That John Shippey, I think is how you say his name. It was just like he was on there in question, but again, they didn't have a lot. There was another guy named J.B. Stevenson who was from Massachusetts and happened to be on the West Coast at the time, and they like found him in a stolen car with a bloody axe and a shovel, and that one was like dismissed. There was nothing with that either, so I was like, wonder what he was into.
They just like, bloody axe? It's okay.
It's fine.
Yeah, that's just normal. I think he had some excuse, like it was used for a Wolverine or something like that. I don't know.
I was about to say, look, used on a deer.
It was something. But something else that I didn't know, and it was funny as I'm like going down these rabbit holes, because I thought I knew a lot about it. It was one of my favorites. I've loved it for some reason. It's one of those, if you're a true crime junkie, you love weird things. But I read something and it was like, said she was married. And I was like, what? I didn't know she was married. So there was a guy, Peter Vector, is how I'm assuming we're saying it. And him and Elizabeth Short had sent postcards to this guy named John O'Neill. And John O'Neill received 2 postcards. One was from Elizabeth, and she signed it with Vector's last name. And then the other one was Vector himself saying, oh yeah, I'm living in Hollywood now, we're married. And that was in September of 1946. So they when all this happened and the police are looking into it, John O'Neill was like, oh, I got these. He like turned in the postcards. And so this is from the FBI. The FBI was like, what? And I'm sure the police were like, what? Because there was no sign of marriage. Nobody had heard anything until these postcards come up. So, I was the same way. I was like,
What?
What? She was married? And so he was in the Army, and what happened was he did something with like the AWOL people, like trying to how to go get him and bring him back. So whatever, it put him in LA. He was in LA, and they took like a little bit of time to like see the sights, and so he went, and he was a suspect at first because they were like, oh, that's
Shady.
interesting. You know, you showed up like you're married. So they track him down. He was actually at Camp McClellan in Alabama. It's like a military base at that time. So he wasn't even there when she died.
Yeah.
And so he went out, and he was like standing on the corner, and she was walking by with one of her friends, and she noticed some sort of insignia on his uniform and asked if he knew John O'Neill, and he happened to remember him. And so then they were like chatting, and that's what they describe Elizabeth Short as someone who could just start up a conversation with anybody. She's super social. Like they end up going to a restaurant, and like all these people know her, and they just keep stopping by and talking to her. So she was like really well known and really social. And, you know, just people loved her, and she was talk up a storm with anybody. So they ended up picking him up, and he spent the night with her and her roommate, and then the next day, and then even with one of his buddies that he was there doing his work with, hung out with him too. And so she decided that it was that next day. It was actually September 21st of 1946. They wanted to play a joke on John O'Neill because he was her childhood sweetheart back in Massachusetts. And she was like, he's really jealous, and he's always told me never to have any more boyfriends. And so it was a prank to send him postcards saying they were married. So I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I was like, that's why. So that's what that was. And he actually, as soon as he saw her in the papers, this is where I have little faith in the LAPD at this time. Because he saw her in the papers, and he contacted them and said, hey, you know, I have a connection with her. I know who she is. You know, she's got my address and my name in her little black book, because she was going to write him. So he reached out to the LAPD to let them know, and he never heard anything back. So this guy was like, hey, I know her. I was here in September. I saw her in September. And they just like, nothing.
That also makes you think, though, if there's something shady going on. Because, one, they didn't look into the shadiest suspect, or one of them, and also didn't contact back to a person who contacted them saying, I know this person, maybe I could help you out with solving this and stuff, and then never hears back from him again. So it makes you wonder, like, are you just not caring at this point? Is it just like you said, where it's she had it coming, she was sleeping around, it just was totally coming to her, or is something else going on? Like, was there somebody in the police that was doing something shady or something like
exactly. that? Exactly. They were like, he's just another John, just another one of her Johns, and just left it at that. He actually had some more stories. So they went on a date that night, and he said they were walking back to their like little motel that they were staying in, and a black car drove up beside him, and there was 5 men inside, and 3 men jumped out and yelled, "There she is!" And so he says that he suggested that he just beat them all up. But she told him that the best thing to do is just run. So he had that's like a random wild encounter. And I try to find where that story, any more info on that, but that was it. He just says a car full of these 5 guys pulled up, 3 jump out, and she's like, "No, we just gotta run. We need to run." So
That's weird too, because like, if somebody's just like, you just need to run, like that makes it seem she's dealt with some crap before or something along those lines.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm like,
if her automatic reaction was like, no, just run.
Yeah, and he said that she swore she didn't know him. So, I mean, I feel like she probably did know him and was just like, no, don't worry about it.
Yeah,
don't worry about it. But if you don't know him, they obviously knew who she was.
Yeah.
And she didn't want him to whoop their butts. She was like, run.
Maybe it was just the fact that she was so used to it that she might really not have known him, but she was just like,
maybe
we're just gonna go.
Maybe there was a lot of stuff about how it was like dangerous time for women to be out by themselves in LA, and she was like, no, let's.
Especially since
she was
run. So well known and talked to so many people. What did she get wrapped up in?
Yeah. And she was just like, we gotta hit the road. So they run back to her hotel. And so he's staying the night with them, like sleeping in her roommate's twin bed because her roommate was a nurse and worked nights. And so he stays, and they bow chicka wow wow. Because he says they couldn't sleep. She said she couldn't sleep, and she asked him if he couldn't sleep, and he said no, and she was like, come over here and kiss me. And so he did. One thing
led to another.
Yeah, and it was bow chicka wow wow. But then, this is what really made me laugh about this whole guy's story. He had the audacity to say that she was not very passionate about it, and he was pretty sure she's just a lesbian.
Oh.
I was like,
that was his go.
Well, because that's what it was. She wasn't enthusiastic enough. She had to be a lesbian. She had to be. But that did segue into, there are theories about her that she toyed with men, but was really a lesbian, and that she was just using them to her advantage to get around. And then other things saying, she was at least bisexual, which I think those things could be true, but they could also be rumors because her promiscuousness making people just want to trash talk her for that time.
Yeah.
And what it is. Because I don't think there was...
Well, and also, going back to the time period, if you were just a stronger independent woman, or a woman who just wanted to have fun, you would be labeled as a lesbian or just a biatch or something along those lines, just because you weren't following the rules of
what society labeled a woman
marriage,
should be doing.
Housewife, all that, mother, all that.
Right, because she just wanted to be out there living it up. For that time, she wanted to be an actress. She was in Hollywood. She was young, that's young. She was 22, and she was just living it up. But I thought that was funny, and like I said, he's not the only one that has said that about her, but it was funny because he was like, oh, she wasn't really passionately in it. Freak. But the last time he saw her was actually September 21st, 1946. So that took him out. So she wasn't married, and he wasn't a suspect because there's military records. He was in Alabama at the time. So, but still, wildness. There was also, before I get into some of those other suspects, the confessions, because I mentioned that there has been so many people that confess. One of the big ones happened right after in January. It was actually the 28th, January 28th, 1947. And his name was Daniel Voorhees. And so he called the police and was like, oh, I need to confess. This is at the same time the papers are running stuff about the killer needing to confess. There was some letters sent talking about, how I'm going to confess tomorrow on this day, which no one actually went on that day. But this guy went the day before. And so he did have a rap sheet because he was from Phoenix, Arizona, and had connections there with several assault cases and rape cases. He also claimed that in 1941, he took her on a bus, but then nothing else. He was saying that was his date. So he claimed to have dated her, and that's what they did. He took her on a bus. So
that's the big huge date. I'm going to take you on a bus ride.
Yep, he took her on a bus in 1941, and she didn't even show up to California until 1943.
So obviously a lie.
Yeah, so that starts the beginning of some of the false confessions.
Which I guess because it was a famous case, but like, why would you want to confess to a murder that you didn't commit?
Right?
That's always my question when people make false ones. It's just like, why would you want to do that?
Do you think he confused her for someone else?
I thought that maybe a little bit at the beginning. I was like, maybe he really did something bad, and I wonder if they investigate him. I think with him, they actually were just like, he's crazy. They're just like, he's crazy.
Just brush it off.
So sometimes I wonder if people do it maybe since they know they're innocent, so they know, well, I'm going to do this, and then they'll investigate me, and they get that attention, but they know that they're not going to go to prison for killing the person because they didn't do it.
But I mean, now you could get in trouble for that, can't you?
Now you get in trouble for, there's like false reporting. Sometimes they can get you for interfering with an investigation.
You get in big trouble for it now.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. But he, like I said, there has been 500 confessions, and maybe one of them did it. We still don't know, but most likely no. I don't think they really did. The next false confession was it might not have been a false confession. I won't call him a false confession. We'll just say people that confessed. Was a Ralph von Hiltz. And this was actually a while later. This was in 1956, January of 1956. And he confessed to helping dispose the body of her. And he said that it was a sailor named Daniel James was dating her and shot her in the stomach over jealousy. So initially I'm like, oh, was that why she was sawed in half? So because she was shot, and they were like, well, let's do it. But I think with that, he was a known drunk and known to say all kinds of stuff at the time. And they were like, there was no signs of being shot. I think her stomach was intact when you talk, because that's one of the things when they talked about the feces, because people try to dismiss that, and they said it was just her bowels backing up, but the coroner and the medical examiner were like, that's not how the body works.
But also, you said there was like the green.
Yeah, and their granule stuff. They're like that. The only way it would have went back into the stomach would be if they connected it that way, because the way she was cut in half, bisected, was there was just her intestines were snipped in half. All other organs were still there and fully intact. So the stomach was not. There was nothing wrong with the stomach. So that means that those feces and that substance had to be in her stomach. And so she was cut right. They think it was a medical professional, because the procedure that was used to cut through the spinal cord to really separate it was what was being taught in medical schools in the 30s. around that time. It was a common procedure to snip right on through the body.
And keep all the organs intact, right?
And keep, everything was intact. So they got through that part, and it required no sawing through bone. And so they just snipped the intestines in half, which is kind of wild to me that they would keep it all separate, But so that's why they think it was a medical professional with that. So I thought, I was like, well, maybe that's why they did that, but I think he was just probably a little crazy. He was known to be the drunk, and he said he waited so long because that sailor Daniel James always carried a gun, and he was worried about getting shot. But he was just one of the bigger false confessions that came up, but also it didn't go anywhere. And so some of the other two big ones, I have some linked cases I want to talk about, and a little bit of a conspiracy I think there is with it. But the big suspects that a lot of people, you talk to some of the investigators, they really thought it was this guy. His name was Leslie Dillon. And he was a 27-year-old bellhop and former mortician assistant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's got that connection with the knowing how to bleed a body, because she had no blood. She'd been completely drained and cleaned up, which I'm kind of like, that's kind of interesting. That's like what a mortician's assistant would be doing. And so it was October of 1948, he started talking to a psychiatrist that was working for the LAPD, Dr. DeRiver, and so he was sending him these correspondence, and that psychiatrist thought he did it because he was saying that he knew who did it. He was an aspiring writer. He wanted to write true crime books, and he was like, I know who killed her, and he knew all these details about it, but kept saying this other person was the one who did it. And so this psychiatrist was like, you did this. And there's some shady stuff with the psychiatrist, and he's got a whole story too that you can look at. He the self-proclaimed like sex expert for the LAPD and like the sex crimes and stuff. But he apparently has his own drama with that. But he did get in trouble for like falsely accusing somebody of doing it.
But he worked for the LAPD, is that what you were saying?
Yes, yeah.
That goes back to the freaking shady stuff in the police and how they were just brushing off stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that was not Leslie Dillon didn't work for the police. The psychiatrist.
That's what I was meaning. Yeah, that's still fishy. Like,
right.
You got shady stuff, and then that's weird to me.
Which, with his explaining of it as like being a different person, did the psychiatrist ever like give him a diagnosis for anything?
I don't think there was a diagnosis that was ever on it. And I wish I would have found why he reached out to the psychiatrist in the first place. But I do know they went to find this guy that he alleged did it, his friend that he knew actually killed him. And so they take him to LA. He didn't want to go to Los Angeles. So they went to Vegas first, and he ended up getting there, and they had him, there was an undercover cop present, and they had him in a hotel room, and he actually wrote a note and dropped it out this window of this motel for people to contact his attorney that he was being held by the police. And they got it, and then they actually arrested him under suspicion of being the Black Dahlia killer, because he knew like certain details about it. And I really feel like I read somewhere that he knew about the tattoo, which was kind of weird because it wasn't a common thing that was known. They kept it secret on purpose, but don't hold me to that 100%. But I do believe I read that in one thing for sure. So he was like talking about all this stuff, knew all these details, and says he knew who did it. And they were just kind of like, you did it. And he got off because they falsely detained him because that undercover cop was present. So he was out of that. There's still police officers and investigators that did it, and they still think he was really the one that did it. Knowing what he knew, being kind of shady about it. He's the mortician assistant, so he knows that. He also has some ties. They believed if he didn't do it, he was involved. So if he wasn't the one that did it, they really think he knows who did it and that he helped. And he had ties to another suspect that I wasn't really going to focus on a whole lot. But his name was Mark Hanson, who had like major connections in LA. He was like big, well known. And he knew her, and she stayed in his house with him, and they say like she refused his advances, and that might be a reason he had to, but he's got a whole story on his own of why he might have done it. But they do think that it could be possible, theories say maybe he was working with Mark Hanson, and Mark Hanson said take care of her, and he just didn't realize that Leslie Dillon was going to be that deranged in how he took care of it, which I could see that. Or maybe this guy just did it, and I don't think for any other reason than being kind of crazy and messed up and wanting that fame. I think in LA at this time, so many people wanted to be famous.
They would do anything it took
It
to
became
get heard.
Like, oh well.
I definitely understand falling down a rabbit hole in this case.
There are endless. I picked up some big ones that I didn't know, and some of the bigger ones just because you kind of have to talk about them a little bit when you're talking about a case like the Black Dahlia. But there are other ones on that list who were really helpful, and they were big suspects for a while, and you can look at newspapers clippings from the time and just different articles that were out and about, and it's huge. And you think, well, yeah, 70 years of just all these theories, and and you can't check everything. Like the FBI has their stuff posted, but you can't look at the crime scene. You can see crime scene photos, but you can't see other police reports from the LAPD, who it was their jurisdiction for the most part, and they did it. So there's stuff you don't know. And if they were keeping the tattoo secret, what other stuff were they keeping secret? Because it was an investigation. They can't broadcast it all out there. So it's just all theories. The other big one that there is so much, like I said, Steve Hodel has a website and has researched this. He believes it was his father. He's really known. He's wrote books on the Black Dahlia and the Black Dahlia Avenger, and I think there's 2, if not 3 of those now. But he was a police officer, and he fully believes that it was his dad. And he's the one that the LAPD came out, and I think I had said 2006 earlier, but it's actually 2004. And they said that there's enough evidence now that if he was still alive, they could indict him on it. Because there's different things, like he was remodeling his home at the time, and they actually have receipts where he bought fertilizer, and I don't know if it was just the fertilizer, but the same type that the bags were found by her.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of weird. He was a big enough suspect, they actually bugged his house. So he had audio bugs in his house. And they caught some really incriminating stuff, including a female screaming. They had audio recordings of a woman screaming in his house, but there was no women's voices before or after. It was just the woman screaming. And then some weird stuff. He talks about that. Almost confesses to killing his secretary. Talking about how if I did kill her, they wouldn't know it now. I'm talking about the Black Dahlia, because they wouldn't know it now because my secretary's dead. And it was it's some weird stuff. So he is a big one, and he is the one I think that a lot of people think did it.
Well, even if his own son thinks he did it too.
Mm-hmm.
If your own kid thinks that you did it, like, you had to be doing some stuff or saying some stuff, even behind closed doors. Just imagine, like, why would his son believe his dad was the Black Dahlia killer?
Well, there's stuff with his son. He didn't know that his dad had been a suspect until he was grown, and he found a photo album, and you can see this pictures on his website, or you can even Google them, and you see, like, this photo album of these women, and one of them looks a lot like the Black Dahlia. There's a lot of controversy, and people say, no, it's not her. Her family says it doesn't look like her. But there is definitely a strong resemblance between these pictures and Elizabeth Short.
I mean, what was the explanation of the album?
There's not, because that was found after he was dead. So they don't know why he had it or who these women are. He just had him.
He seems like one. Even if he wasn't the Black Dahlia killer, he did some stuff during his time.
Yeah,
period.
he already had a case and, like, some legal issues with molesting his daughter, his 12-year-old daughter. He had, like, a big case with that at the same time, and he was just known. His family, they've done interviews and stuff about him. He was just not a good man, and very, very weird. But so his son didn't know. His daughter knew that he was a suspect, but his son didn't, and they didn't really talk in their adult lives until they happened to come together when he died, and that's when they shared their stories. And he discovered on his own that his dad had been a suspect in this. Because he found those, and he said he found the album, and just the picture, for some reason, it was like, oh, the Black Dahlia. And I think on his website, he talks about, because there was a movie out at the time that was talking about the Black Dahlia, and it resembled her, and he was like, oh, and he, dug into it, and that's when he realized it really looked like her. But so you can dive down that rabbit hole of digging into him. And, there's a lot of links. He had handwriting analysis done to see, and it's like, it's back and forth. You've got people that say no. Like, there's people that are like, that person doesn't resemble her at all in the picture. And then they're like, no, the handwriting doesn't. And, I mean, I look at it and I have my own opinions. I think the picture looks like her. I think the handwriting matches. But, some people think differently. So that's really all you get with a case like this, is looking at it, deciding what you think, and then you just...
That's what these cases are very interesting, but also they make you sad and angry almost, because you'll never know full on who killed her. And even thinking, like, her family or friends, whatever, and then their children, grandchildren, whatever, still will never know.
Right.
Who did it.
Yeah, especially, and it's just been so long. I think the evidence and the things they have now could very well be the closest it'll ever be. Mm. So you can read and you can see who you think, and I think that's what a lot of people have done, is, these two are the closest to probably what did it. Who did it, and and George Hodel, like, there's a lot of stuff. LA at this time was wild. There was a lot of cases, and so Steve Hodel actually links his dad to a lot of them, including the Zodiac killer, and then people have their beliefs on that. But there is a lot of stuff at that time, and a lot of evidence he looks at that, it makes you wonder, because if you're willing to cut a woman's face up and cut her in half, I mean, I don't think that was your first time at the rodeo.
Yeah.
And probably not your last, if you're just...
Well, and also...
you tortured her, not just that. You weren't even just accidentally kill her and dispose the body. Like, there's torture, and you sliced pieces off of her.
Well, and also placed her in a space where she was gonna be found. Like, you...
Oh, yeah.
You weren't... It wasn't where if you accidentally killed her, you were trying to hide the body. Or even if they did torture her and then they wanted to hide the body. Like, she was placed in a area where she was going to be found. She was cleaned up of all evidence, all that. Like, whoever did it wanted this to become a case.
And it's almost like one of those, like, do you think them not being found out gave them a big head to where they were like, I can do it again? Like,
or they've done it before.
Yeah.
That's...
Right. Yeah, because she was found, like, right off the sidewalk. If you look at the pictures, you see the sidewalk, and she was, like, dunk, right there, right by the road. Road, sidewalk, her. Like, just, boop. And like, laid, but not even just, like, it's off, like, heat. Like, she's laid, sprawled out, her body lined up, but in her pieces.
Yeah.
Which they even thought, like, briefly maybe it was a woman that did it, and that's why she was sawed in half, so she was easier to move. They still think that might have been why they did it, because she was easier to move. But, yeah, I definitely think the person who did, there was some process into that. It wasn't just...
Oops.
Yeah, it was not an oops. Like, that was pretty deranged. And so, the other cases at that time, there was... The mayor in LA at the time was actually getting really pissed off because there had been so many other cases. And there was so she was in January. In February, there was another one, and it's kind of known as like the lipstick murder. And her name was Jean French. And it was February 10th, 1947. She was found severely beaten, broken neck. I mean, she was beaten bad. And she was found, I don't think she was naked. I think she had, like, all her clothes on. But I'm not sure on that. But she was found just dumped off the side. And she actually had, I don't want to cut, FUBD written on her belly, like, on her skin in lipstick. In her lipstick. And then the letters TEX. And... So, people really thought that was BD for the Black Dahlia. Because at that time, the newspaper was trying to coax out the killer. And wanted some sign of who it was or someone to say something. So, they actually ran a headline that said the Black Dahlia killer confessed. And that they got him. And then... Shortly after that is when the FUBD was found on her. And
so that was like an FU to the police and media.
Yeah, so
saying, don't act like I'm caught. I'm not caught.
Right. They were like, no, this is me. So then there's people and they think maybe it was just because that case was so big and they did it at that time.
Somebody wanted to copycat.
Yeah, because her case, I looked into a little bit too. She was last seen on the 9th, but she was also one of, a lady who was out for a long time. She went to a restaurant with 2 men, and then she went to a cafe alone. She was estranged with her ex-husband, and then at midnight she was seen with a man at a bar, and she stayed at a bar till closing, and then was last seen fighting with her friend at that bar. And then that was really it, and then they found her. And then go right into March 10th of 1947, and Evelyn Winters was found with electric wire and her gown around her neck, strangled. And Jean French had been strangled. And Evelyn Winters was severely beaten. So that was another thing. They were like, oh, that's another wild case right here. That's like January, February, March. And before that, there was also, I looked at other cases they thought maybe had been linked, because they progressively got worse throughout, and they were like some San Diego sex crimes, all the way up from 1931, 1934, 1936. There's a ton of cases, a lot of women, And I think it's a big chunk of being that time period of women.
Yeah.
You know, if you were married and at home with your family, probably wouldn't have happened. Which is not true, because some of them were, you know, normal. They're all normal women.
But even more during that time period, the state of normal for that time period type deal. But it is sad that during that time period is like, well, if a woman's out at night on a sidewalk, she had what was coming to her, which is absolutely terrible. But that's, when you look at the cases during that time period, you're like, that's how it seems everybody reacts to those.
It really was just a rough time for women.
Yeah.
You know, just I think a lot of it, you know, a lot of these cases, I mean, it was women they just get murdered, attacked, assaulted, and it was just kind of like,
brushed off like nothing.
Well, it happened again. Darn.
Another one.
3 months in a row. Shoot. But so with that one, Evelyn Winters, when she was found, it was really weird. There's just these similarities in it. And she was found naked. They actually called hers another nude murder, is what the headline said. And she, the guy that found her, his name was George Wickliffe. And it was really bizarre, because when he found her, he admitted to kissing her body. Yeah, her dead body. He found her dead body and was like, I kissed it.
Like on the mouth?
Yeah, he was like, I kissed her.
What? That is
right?
Crickets. Just.
Yeah, that's how, when I read it, I was like,
let me reread that.
Yeah, I was
like,
like,
read that a couple times. I don't know if my brain would process that.
Right, when I read it, they were like, it was kind of, the guy who found her was bizarre. And I was like, bizarre? And they're like, he kissed her body. And I was like, yep.
That's bizarre.
That's very bizarre. I mean, she just looked kissable. I mean,
that's definitely one. It's just a eyebrow raise and a head scratcher. Just what the
right. And then what was open about it? Open to be like, yeah, I kissed her.
Like, it's no big deal.
Like, I found her, and then I kissed her, and then I called you guys. Like,
nothing.
You know, just like it was normal. But so that was one of those. That was in March. That's right after they found the Black Dahlia. And so Steve Hodel actually has what he calls the LA Lone Women Murders. And it's 9 women, including the Black Dahlia. And they started, and he thinks his dad's responsible for all these. And it started in 1943 with Ora Murray, and then 1944, Georgette Bodorf, and then Elizabeth Short in 47, Jean French in 47, Lillian Dominiquez in 47, Gladys Kearns in 48, Mimi Boomhauer in 48, Jean Spangler in 48, and a Louise Springer in 1949. So these are all these women were killed in similar ways. A lot of, assault, strangulation, and he thinks his dad was responsible for those. So, and that's all right there. And they almost go in pairs of 3s, which was kind of weird. I was like, oh, is that a link? But it's just wild to think that all these women just have unsolved. They're unsolved.
Yeah. There's
just all these dead women with unsolved cases. That's crazy to me. But, and he has a lot of information on the links, and like I said, I've not looked into each of these individual. I just knew that he linked it with Elizabeth Short and the Black Dahlia. So there's a lot with that and a lot with the case. It's a big case. There's rabbit hole after rabbit hole and branch after branch that you can follow, and you can choose to follow one thing and focus and find something, or you make it broad. I literally had to stop myself and say I cannot do any more research, because I have to find a point to focus on and stop. because you can just keep going.
Yeah.
And you find something and you walk on it and you're like, okay, this is what I believe. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, nope, something else. And it's just an endless cycle. So the conspiracy nut in me really locked on a certain chunk of some of the FBI files that I found. Because, you know, I love a good twist. And it was something that I don't think people talk about ever. And so when I read it, I was like, what the heck? Because it was crazy to me. So, like I said, on the FBI's website, you can look at the documents that they had on the case. They have an archive. And in that archive were some letters that a lady named Edith Thomas actually wrote to J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI at the time. And she actually wrote 2 letters to him, and actually got generic responses back. But the first letter she wrote in, it was February 15th of 1947. So it was February right after the Black Dahlia was found. And she said that on January 14th, which is the day before the Black Dahlia was found, that there was an issue in her apartment building. She was like, apartment 405 belongs to a Mr. Hawkins, who was an ex-cop. So, ding, 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 ding.
What have I been saying this entire flipping time? That there's something weird going on with the frickin' police.
Right? You've been saying that, and I'm sitting here on these letters like, yes, let me get to my conspiracy. Mwahaha. And so he was an ex-cop living in their building, and there was like a terrible disturbance. So apparently the neighbor could hear all the screaming and the like obscene things that were being said between Mr. Hawkins and a female. And they were just like really fighting, to the point where she goes down to the manager of the building and is like, it's getting wild. Like, they are really fighting. And so when I guess he goes up, somehow the police get called because this woman is screaming and it's just bad. And 12 cops come and they get him and arrest him, and he is covered in blood. Like, covered in it. And then an ambulance comes to pick up the girl. And in this letter, they don't ever say anything about it, but it's reminds me of like a little old biddy in the beauty shop. So it's a little gossipy. And she knows the buzz of this apartment building. She knows the happenings. And she says that one of the ladies sees the girl that the ambulance is picking up and faints. Because the girl is beaten and covered in blood and has her face cut. Her cheeks are cut in a smile, ear to ear. Like the Black Dahlia.
And this is the day before?
This is the day before. This is January 14th, 1947. And she is cut ear to ear, covered in blood. And so they're like, she's saying, she's like, it was her. It was she talks about it. She was cut up, terribly mutilated, her mouth cut from ear to ear. And the lady in number 400 fainted when she saw it. The next morning, the body of the Black Dahlia was found. And she was all cleaned up. And she says that Mr. Hawkins came back. He was all cleaned up. And then it was just like business as usual. And he just kept coming and a-going. But she mentions in here, and she was like, there's a second murder that's happened in the past week. She's talking about on February 10th, the murder, which was the lipstick murder. And she talks about how she says it has all the earmarks of his dirty work. So that's 2 cases that other people have linked together, and she's picking it up. So she's talking about Elizabeth Short and the Black Dahlia murder, and Jean French in the lipstick murder and saying he's just coming and going. So she sends this letter to the FBI, gets a generic response saying, I've received your letter and we appreciate it, and we're sending the information to the local police because they don't have jurisdiction.
And everybody knows that ain't going to do diddly squat.
Especially because he's an ex-policeman.
He's an ex-police officer. Exactly.
Well, and that explains, like I said, during the whole thing, I was like, the police are not, which in cases, no disrespect to police, but in a lot of cases, they do not do a very good job, especially during
1947?
Yeah, exactly. But doing even more of a weird job where it makes you think, is it an inside, like somebody inside, or an ex-cop has done something, so we're keeping this hush-hush.
Right. Why were there so many suspects and so many people, and it was all like,
What was the reason for him being an ex-cop? Was it like he just retired, or?
I don't know for sure why he was an ex-cop, but that skirmish with her is not the first one. It has happened before because he is known for being hateful. She talks about he's hateful in this building. He's had other like women in there and other affairs that happen. A lady that he was seeing was drunk and was either fell off the roof or from the fourth floor. So and he happens to live on the fourth floor. So
yeah, she quote unquote fell off the fourth floor.
Yeah.
That he just so happens to live on. That's just, I don't even.
Yeah, and they talk about there's a lot of the people she talks about a lot of people in the building being afraid of him. And so in her next letter, because nothing happens, he's just coming and going. It's just normal. So
like he didn't just slice a woman's face open like that.
Right, it was just like nothing. There wasn't just a bunch of police officers that come and got him. Okay. Now, I think there could be some gossipy in this, but I feel like that is such a dramatic story. You know, how are you gonna not? It could have been exaggerated, but obviously there was some sort of domestic dispute where those words were used, and she was beaten and bloody. And this is the case the day before.
Yeah. Well, and obviously something bad really did happen if she is writing to the head of the FBI saying, this is weird because I just saw a woman who had the same marks that this murder victim had. Yeah.
And so it was obviously, there's obviously something. A little something happening. And I couldn't even find the guy's name. Mr. Hawkins is all there was. I don't know. I was like, I couldn't find anything else. I was trying, and I was like, who is Mr. Hawkins?
But also, that's shady. Why can't you find anything about him and stuff? So that makes you even question more. What did you guys bury of this man if you can't find anything?
Right. They have so many lists of suspects and people that are included. You know, when you look it up, you see all these people that were potential suspects or possibilities. Why can't you find any? Why is this guy's name not listed anywhere? Why was he not looked at? So I'm curious. You know, was this lady just like off her rocker, or
was she onto something? And they were saying,
but still, why? If you got a letter like this,
why not look into it?
Why would you not look into it?
Exactly. They're keeping it hush hush. That's
it's too weird to. I really feel like I would believe that police today would at least look into that. That's a report the day before someone's found that like that. Like, come on now. Come on.
Yeah.
But, so nothing happens. So, she writes another letter on February 26th of 1947. And is like, she actually says, as you know, the Black Dahlia case has been quickly hushed up and apparently all covered up. That's her first sentence in her letter.
So she's like over it. She's like, come on, y'all.
She knows exactly.
She's like, we know. We saw. Someone in this building saw her. You know, she left on an ambulance. And nothing's happened. So, and I'm guessing there was some other stuff going on in the apartment complex because he was supposed to leave. Apparently the sheriff ordered him to leave on the 18th of that month, and he was still there. So he was supposed to be getting the boot. But she said that firemen and police officer have just kept showing up multiple times, cleaning up stuff. She said he got a new bed. I'm like, oh, why? Because it's covered in her blood? You know?
Multiple people's blood?
Yeah. And there was something mentioned about like clearing out old papers and like throwing them in the alley out his window. So he's just like getting rid of stuff, which I thought was strange. Like all of a sudden you're like clearing it out. But obviously it's not because you're leaving, because you're supposed to be out the 18th and you're not going. And you got a new bed. You're moving a bed in and you're supposed to be moving your bed out.
Yeah, so he didn't plan on leaving anytime soon.
No. And so, and then in this letter this is where she talks about the woman who was drunk and either fell or allegedly fell from the roof or the fourth floor. And she says he shoved her in that situation. And then she also talks about another affair that happened. And this letter was a little more confusing to follow. But she talks about there used to be a bookstore next door. And that there was some sort of tussle with the people there. Because she says that the wife screaming and seeing her choked still like it's something she'll never forget. So I'm like, so she watched him strangle the wife of the shopkeeper, the bookstore keeper next door. So like he was aggressive and violent. And if you recall, all of those people, they were strangled.
Yeah.
She was strangled. The lipstick murder, she was strangled.
Yeah.
You know, so that's wild. And she said there was a man named Michael who lived there with a white dog who used to talk too much about that one. So I guess he was really witness to that fight and he talked too much and he disappeared.
Just
and
taken care of.
And she said she had heard that they were saying he was in the hospital with alcohol poisoning. But then that was like...
That's it. That's just stamp on that, close that. Yeah. What happened to her? Did she just...
No idea. All these two... you can look in the archive on the FBI's website, and like that's it.
I nearly was going to say something, because I was like, this woman is being really freaking brave for telling what she's seeing, which... Yep. But also... Time period. Also, you got an ex-cop who obviously is doing some dirty stuff and has some dirty cops and I guess firemen too helping him. And she is still writing these letters saying, stuff's going down. You need to do something. And then don't hear... I nearly was going to ask, I was like, do you not hear anything about her? Because they probably ended that real fast.
And it just goes to show, like, she's like, oh, I'm going to write the FBI in D.C. instead of talking to the police. So, and she mentions in one of them that they're scared to mention things. Because obviously he's had accidents there before with other people, you know, and situations of violence.
Yeah, well, no, if one guy already disappeared because he's talking too much about the whole ordeal.
Yeah. Well,
you're gone. Find out if she was found out writing to FBI trying to get something done, then that's definitely going to be, well, you need to go.
Yep. Exactly. It's like, so when I saw these, I was instantly like, what?
my brain goes straight to, I believe he's totally...
Something at least has to be up.
Well, that to me, in what world, because that's not a common thing, the cutting across the cheeks.
Right, it wasn't like it just kept on happening. Like,
yeah. What are the chances that a woman gets slashed ear to ear, and then a dead body of a woman slashed ear to ear is found?
It makes me I wish that it had been investigated and looked at. Because you don't know, maybe just playing a little bit of that devil's advocate, maybe she was just really beaten. And so then they saw the pictures of the Black Dahlia and were like, oh my gosh, that girl last night, her face was cut like that. Maybe she was just pummeled. But we don't know because he was an ex-cop and it wasn't looked at.
Yeah.
Or if it, I feel like this is something that should have been addressed. But
definitely.
It just wasn't. Or, you would think, even if they did address it, that it would at least be looked at. I mean, there are suspects' names who are just the names. You can't figure out why they were suspects and then why they were dismissed. So why is there not a Hawkins
anywhere on that list?
Or why can't you find his name? It's just like you said, a Mr. Hawkins. That makes it look even worse, though. Because
this is it's like an eyewitness account. Could they be wrong? And, it's just a little dramatic. It was stretched a little. They don't know what they saw. Sure. But how is it not something that's looked at?
Yeah.
You can read about the false confessions from, just the drunkie. He was just the town drunk. Or, random famous people that were attached on there, saying, oh, they saw her one time. They could have done it. But not this cop that someone says sliced and diced a lady the night before.
Well, and has a history of violence.
A history of violence, yeah.
Yeah.
So this one was the one I was like, oh, poosh, blew my mind. And so she keeps sending these letters. And then there was another letter that was sent to the FBI, to Hoover, by another lady who... This one was not as eyewitness, but I thought it was interesting because I really felt like the responses were different. But that could have just been me looking at it. Because Edith just gets plain responses saying, we got your letter, we've passed it on. And then this lady, Louise, sends a letter talking about how she knows who did it. The suspect for the Black Dahlia killing, because he stole her social security number and took $70 from her. And he claimed that he was making motion pictures and that he was going to make an actor out of her. And she sent a letter, and for some reason, I just really felt like when I read it, that it was almost like they took it a little more seriously in their response, because they were like, we've received it about the information on the individual whom you believe may be identical with the killer of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia. And so they talk about the investigation in it and how it's really in Los Angeles and that they're going to send the stuff to them. I'm taking the liberty to refer your letter. But then I just feel like, you can even see in this one, they're like, we received it, and you may be assured I am appreciative of your courtesy and interest in furnishing such information to me. That's what they give Edith at one letter. That was her first letter. Her second one, and it just says, I want to thank you for making the information available to me, and let's see. The matter you mentioned does not come within investigative jurisdiction of this bureau, but I'm referring it. So they did say they're referring it, but they just say, I'm referring your comments to appropriate local authorities. It was just like a different vibe.
Well, to me, this could just be the conspiracy theorist that I am, but it just seems shady. Like, it's a shut up and drop this.
Yeah.
Like, you need to stop talking about this.
It's also interesting that the first one, they were just like, thank you. They didn't say they were referring it. And then the second one, they're like, okay, we referred it. And that was the last letter she sent.
Right, and the first one's the one where they're like, she fainted because she saw her face slit from ear to ear. And they're like, thanks. So, but then I also wonder, because we know that her, not husband, told the police when he saw her in the newspaper, he contacted them and said, I know her. You're probably going to find my name in her little booklet. And the police never reached out to him. So I'm like, maybe the FBI did just forward that. And then it was still up to LAPD to do nothing because he was an ex-cop. So that's the rabbit hole that I was like really trying to dig at and see if I could find anything.
But you can't find anything because, weirdly enough, there's nothing to find.
Right.
And that makes it even more of, I definitely think he did it type deal. Because my thing, why can't you find anything?
Right. And, when you look at the FBI files, it's not like I read 1,000 letters. There was the Edith's letter, and Louise's letter. So it's not like there was 1,000 letters listed in the archive under this. It was like those two. And I'm just like, that's a little too much. And that I couldn't find, even trying to search, I couldn't find Hawkins' first name. And I was trying to find, when you look it up, you can find where people have seen this before, but then that's like it. And like I said, like he's not listed on the suspect list. So it's just, I think if this happened today, I think Elizabeth Short probably would have got some justice a little faster. You hope. You get hopeful. But I just think there are some things that were overlooked, ignored,
disregarded.
I think a lot of it being because she was young and promiscuous and in Hollywood wanting to be an actress, and just something that they were like, well, there's another one. Just like
all the other ones stacked up.
Yeah, just like then the lipstick murder with Jean French. She was just, she was out real late, her ex-husband. So she's a divorcee, and they're unsolved. But there's other cases. I mean, they thought that it was stacking on other cases. That there was a 10-year-old girl in 1931 that they thought maybe a widow in 1931, a 22-year-old, another divorced person. There's just all these different women, and I'm like,
well, and it seems like they're just getting brushed off, and it's one of those just where shady stuff's happening.
And I will even give the benefit of the doubt in the fact that crime scene investigations at that time and forensically, it was not as advanced, but I still think there's a lot of it with the investigators and detectives themselves that I think it was just chose not to. And this might be an example of a highly publicized case that got too overwhelming for them. And there was too many suspects and too many people. I know they interviewed a lot of people, so they didn't just sit on it. But maybe they just got too overwhelmed and it was just too much to focus on where they needed. So it's easy for us to sit here and look at stuff and be like, why didn't you do this?
Yeah, but you don't know what's going on.
But I do think they need to respect women more, and that they should have took it more serious.
Yeah. Well, you got a guy that has 3 checks. The guy who done the magic, she's like knew her, did the magic tricks, and then had mannequins with the slit mouth, like.
And then hit the road.
Yeah, it's just is one of those. So
yeah, right. And then and that's like, so we've got our Edith talking about Mr. Hawkins, and I'm like, oh well, he should have been someone we should have really looked in. And then you're talking about Orson Welles, but then I feel like he wasn't. Mr. Hawkins was a cop, so they're like, no, we're not going to investigate that one. Orson Welles, no. He's a famous, well-respected man. We're not gonna
dive in that.
Right. So I'm like, what? You just dismiss it because was Elizabeth Short not worth it? You were like, oh, she's just
one woman.
She's just one woman. We're not gonna mess with these men's lives. He was a cop. We're gonna leave him alone. Or no, Orson Welles. No, he's got things to do. And it makes me wonder if that's why there was so many unsolved attacks against women, because it was just looked at as
if a high suspect has any sort of standing,
we're not going to ruin their lives for this.
Well, you hear that in modern cases. Mm-hmm. They're just all the time they're like, well, we're not going to ruin his life over one mistake.
Yeah.
What about the effects on the women? What about Elizabeth Short, Jean French, Evelyn Winters, or all of the other 9, the LA Lone Women murders?
Yeah, just nope. Brush that underneath the rug and call it a day.
Yeah. But that's which, and I feel like I've talked about so much, but it is really just like the surface of the Black Dahlia case. And like I said, I kind of stayed on the outskirts of things I hadn't heard, or the fun little things. Not fun. It's not fun, but the new and interesting things. We could have dived into why, Steve Hodel thinks his dad did it so much, and you can look at that, but he keeps such a detailed website. You can see all that. So if you want to see why George Hodel was in it, or even Orson Welles, you could check out her book. There's a lot of stuff with it.
Dive down the rabbit hole yourself.
Yeah, whichever one you find your entry point, and just follow it. Leslie Dillon has a lot more weird stuff that we discussed and kind of leaned one way, and we were like, oh yeah, I bet it's him. But you can start really looking into Leslie Dillon and be like, oh no, it was definitely him. It's endless. It's endless, but it's one of those that has always piqued my interest, and it's wild to think that it's gone so long without being solved.
And sad thing is, probably it will never be solved.
Well, I think we'll never know more than what we know now, unfortunately.
Sadly.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Until next time,
remember you can find us on
our own website, Facebook,
Instagram,
YouTube, Twitter,
and even Pinterest.
Links are in the description.
As always,
stay weary,
stay leery,
and stay eerie.